try. Yeah, amazing. Okay, so I'm just gonna use a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about direct to device, right? So satellite to cellular connectivity or satellite to smartphones connectivity. I think we could talk about three main things. I mean, talk about many, but this presentation includes three things. I'm just going to pick one for the sake of time, but we could talk about the technical bit of direct to device. We could talk about the regulatory bit, more about the impact in regulations and policy that direct to device would have. But I'm going to pick for these 5 minutes the economic contribution. So the actual utility that we believe potentially direct to device can have. We in Access Partnership we have been working on this for a while, since even this was not a popular topic. I know I was talking about it. Some companies were, of course, already working on it secretly and developing the technology without being public, and we have been supporting one of those manufacturers doing this. So we have been working actually for like 4 or 5 years on this, and we have confidence that that this technology eventually will become something very, very, very interesting. It is already something super interesting, but direct to device or satellite to cellular is just normally messaging and emergency messaging, right? But we believe that, like everything with technology, it's amazing how things suddenly happen. And again, if we were, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I wouldn't be presenting about this because we didn't know, and now we are. So who knows what's going to happen in 5 years with this technology and how our smartphones may evolve, satellites are evolving, and maybe this technology will surprise us. We think it will. So some of the potential cases for this to actually have an impact are the people that are living without cellular coverage, which it's small percentage, but when you think about how many people they are, it's like 350 million people around the world who today live outside the coverage of a cellular network. So this is one of the use cases that we see. This can, I'm going to skip a few because they were part of the technical thing, and we can talk more in the panel. But you can see here some of the main applications that the industry is talking about. This, of course, emergency and disaster response, constant connectivity, the thing I was mentioning about rural and remote coverage, and also IoT and remote monitoring. And what we did in Access Partnership, and this is the message I want to share with you in this couple of minutes, is we have a team of economists that housed, and they produce, among other things, economic analysis and economic impact analysis. So they analyze technologies and they make calculations with a methodology on trying to assess or estimate the impact of that technology in the economy, or calculate potential revenue, etc. We can circulate not only this presentation, but the paper also for the white paper for the people that are interested. But in our recently published paper, you will see the methodology behind these numbers. And the calculations give almost 60 billion of contribution in global GDP from direct to device. So for example, bringing some of these millions of people that are not connecting, not because of cost, not because they cannot afford connecting, but just because they live in an area where there's no coverage. Just by connecting some of them in this methodology, the impact in global GDP is 60 billion. When you think about global GDP, 60 billion may not be something huge, but this is what we have estimated that it can bring. I think it's for the next 10 years. So that's where evolving in the next 10 years, it could end up adding 60 billion at that point. 360 million, as I said, that's the number of people that live outside cellular coverage, so 3G in this case. But the most interesting number that we got is for emergencies and connectivity when natural disasters happen. So this is pretty obvious, but when there are natural disasters, hurricanes or floods, terrestrial networks, sometimes they are so damaged that they fail, and satellite connectivity becomes, the tool to help with that. The numbers gave us that from the total economic loss that every year we get from natural disasters, if this technology evolves where we believe that it will, and people suddenly are able to have this connectivity, and emergency services can have this connectivity, it could save up to $100 billion in damages every single year. So that's where the numbers actually impress. 60 billion global GDP in 10 years is good, but it doesn't impress. The other one impresses much more. Again, it's an estimation. It's an analysis that may fail, and reality may prove differently. But at least this is what we got from this paper. So if I can, I'm going to close now. But if I can share something in this couple of minutes, it's that there are some use cases that can really have an impact from this technology. And hopefully the people that are working on it and that are building it can surprise us and actually make it a reality. I leave this with you, and then in the panel we can talk a little bit about other things. For example, the revenue, the potential expected revenue that companies may get. We've heard so many huge numbers that we said, let's do our own to see, what we get, right? And we get lower numbers than other estimations. We did an independent assessment. We did this white paper for us, for everyone, not for any client. And if you see there, in 10 years, we put a range of 4 billion to 16 billion total in revenue for everyone. This is global revenue. So again, it's not a number that will impress mobile operators. May impress some satellite operators, but I don't think these numbers would impress T-Mobile or AT&T in the US, right? And again, with the use cases that we are seeing for now for direct-to-device, the numbers that impress us more are the impact of the technology rather than the potential revenue for the industry. And I think if we got the numbers right, or depending on how things evolved, maybe that will also affect a little bit how the technology is developed, right? Who's going to have the incentive of actually having this? Because if incentive is not in the mobile operators, then maybe everything changed. Maybe this affects the discussions on regulations. Maybe this affects the discussions in WRC on the agenda items that are thinking about using mobile spectrum for this technology, and allowing satellites to actually get into those frequencies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is something that we are going to keep an eye on, right? The estimations of the potential revenue for the mobile operators with this. So I'm going to close here. And
I think we'll hold off on questions in case they get it to the end. I think it's not done by preference, I promise. It was just order of an aggregated slide deck. So I think we have.
Stay here? No.
You can take a seat there, or if you want to watch the we can get everyone up there later.
Watch Kevin.
So, I mean, we've heard WRC 27 is going to be a big WRC for satellite operators. Next up is Kevin Eisenhower. He's here on behalf of the Global Satellite Operators Association, GSOA, today. Kevin plays a key role in supporting SES's strategic long-term spectrum positioning within the global marketplace, and leads and supports global initiatives designed to protect, optimize, and enhance SES's spectrum assets. So I think he's going to have a slightly different take on the satellite angle today, or slightly different subject matter, should I say. But welcome, Kevin.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there were a lot of topics that I could have picked. Actually, there's a lot happening in the satellite sector at the moment. But one of the topics that was under debate and that we've seen in PMSC as well is spectrum sharing. So there's one application and one experience that we have and building on at the moment in the frequency band 3842 gigahertz. And I also wanted to bridge that discussion also with emerging aspects and trends that we're seeing in the industry and broach on D2D as well. So I tried to keep it quite general for discussions afterwards. But a short word maybe on GSOA. GSOA is basically an association that represents the entire satellite industry and provides a platform to basically a collaboration between each other and to have a global voice of the industry. So you have satellite operators, manufacturers, and service providers as well that could be included in this. So you have the different companies here. So here I wanted to first focus on C-band on 3.4 to 4.2, even 3.3 to 4.2 gigahertz, because we heard about the importance of mid-band for mobile spectrum. Here, this take was, there are some slight differences from country to country, but this was to give a global perspective that came out of WRC 23, just showing to you the difference as well with mobile allocation and IMT identification. I think there was a discussion on that. The entire band is mostly allocated up to 3.8 for mobile IMT nowadays, with this evolution at the last conference going up to 3.8 gigahertz pretty much everywhere except in Asian countries in region 3. In region 3, there are some changes or switches country by country, mostly in this band. But what we're seeing as a global trend is that for FSS usage, it's been slowly diminishing and focusing on 3842. Now there is a global, let's say, a global trends here and I would say there are three of those. But starting from the bottom here, because it's specifically for 3842. We're seeing more and more this trend of spectrum sharing. For example, in Europe, 3.8 to 4.2, there is FSS usage, but it's less pervasive than everywhere around the world. The C-band for satellite is mainly very interesting for its very robust to brain fade attenuation, so very good reliability, and it provides a lot of services in tropical countries, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. It's still quite heavily used, and we still have a lot of the distribution that is using this band. So FSS is still quite heavily relying in some regions in C-band. In Europe, the story is slightly different. In this band, it's mainly for gateways for the service around the world. So 3842, we have specific locations, and that's why Europe was very interested in seeing, can we do a better usage of this band, 3842? There are also fixed usage as well and fixed satellite service. And with these specific locations, it might be possible to have this a usage for private networks for 5G. Another global trend that we're seeing is convergence between services, and that I'll draw on as well with D2D, with satellite industry also providing some sort of terrestrial services. We're seeing also some convergence in standards because we want to have lower the cost of satellite proprietary devices, instead using more 5G technologies. So we're standardizing the entire industry to have this scale market and basically having access to equipment much more cheaper. The other trend that we're seeing is we've seen a lot of claim for more spectrum, but more and more regulators are interested to see, is it always the case that 5G needs commercial access everywhere? We're seeing specialized use cases for 5G, enterprise, private networks. And so there is this trend around the world that we're looking at localized usage of bands and coming back to spectrum sharing as well. So these are global trends that I wanted to highlight. Now, coming back to 3842 and the overview, because as you saw, we've been following this over the past 2 years. Now we're close to a conclusion on these aspects for a European harmonization of 3.8 to 4.2. We were talking about the right conditions for sharing. Sharing also needs to be flexible, but you need to have some sort of conditions and some guidance to know if it's possible to share or not. And what we've seen generally when you have commercial 5G that accesses the band in the commercial band like 3.4 to 3.8, they pay for spectrum and they don't want to be limited to protect other services. So what happens is that the other services migrate out because they paid a lot of money to access that spectrum. Here, what we're seeing in 3.842 is we need to share that spectrum, so it needs to be licensed on a case-by-case basis, and we need to do it in bands where the usage is limited, where the other users can actually share. So in Europe, it's limited to a few locations, so there is room for other services to come in. Aspects for consideration, Europe is also used oftentimes as an example for other regulators around the world. So they kind of copy paste into regulation. We try to warn them that this is not necessarily applicable to them. It's a flexible use case, but you need to take into account what is your usage in your countries. We have, for example, in Africa, this band 3.842 is used by the satellite receivers and are not necessarily registered. So they might not even know that there's a dish that is used somewhere and they wouldn't know how to protect it. So that's a first warning that we keep telling to regulators around the world. The second is there are some clear recommendations on power limitations. Here, the powers that you see are the maximum powers that are recommended in the guidelines for European harmonization. They were the ones studied to have a lesser impact into the sensitive services like satellite, but it could be applicable to another band and other services. You could have different power levels. What we wanted to avoid was to have 5G or mobile companies coming in and trying to use this band just as a stepping stone for then another commercial usage where we know sharing is not possible anymore. So here you can see these power levels. Just for context, they're about 25 dB lower than commercial 5G, so quite noticeably lower in order to emphasize the sharing in the private local networks. So those are recommendations that are provided. And finally, the framework for it is really important. You cannot have a blanket licensing approach where this would cause problems if you set up your base station right next to an incumbent users. So you would have to create a lot of databases for shared usage. So these are pretty much the main aspects for consideration for this private networks in 3.8 to 4.2 and this sharing framework there as an example of how it was done for this band. Now for D2D, because we saw convergence between different industry, the main goal for everyone, be it Wi-Fi, be it 5G, be it satellite, is to connect people. And here we're looking at D2D. So Juan touched on these different applications, disaster relief, agriculture, for example, transportation, IoT are big ones for D2D. And here with this slide, simply wanted to provide a perspective on a lot of these different initiatives that are being done with the different satellite operators that are working with MNOs, mobile manufacturers. And the reason is because there are different approaches to doing D2D. Some want to connect directly to standardized frequencies inside your phones, so directly accessing to antennas that exist today in your phones. Others want to use more proprietary approaches where you would have in your phone an antenna specifically for these D2D bands, MSS bands. Today, just for numbers, there is at the end of 2024, 3% of the 7 billion active smartphones support D2D. That's mainly the iPhone Globalstar solution that we have today, which is proprietary. So they added an antenna directly into your iPhones to have this disaster relief or these emergency calls. Finally, just to give you a broad perspective on the discussions on the two variants of D2D, the first one that we have is D2D and MSS bands. So you have dedicated bands for mobile satellite spectrum. And there you could, like Globalstar is doing, provide services to phones, and you have already an existing regulatory framework that could be used. The issue is that in your phones today, most of these bands don't exist. So if it would be a proprietary solution, it would be some smartphones that have it, others that don't. So it's not a solution that is off the shelf and you can apply today. That's the only downside, but the regulatory framework is a bit more robust. On the other side, there's the discussion of accessing IMT bands directly. So of course, the benefit would be that you can directly connect all your phones in the market. The issue is that now there is, like I said before, MNOs paid a handsome fee to access the spectrum, so they don't want to come in and have disturbances. So what you would have to do is try to find an agreement with your local MNOs, and that could be country by country, which becomes a bit more difficult, let's say, from a satellite perspective in smaller countries if you have borders and you don't want to interfere. So there's this interference framework. So sorry if I took more time than allotted, but I just wanted to provide these perspective and these trends. This is only one specific aspect. Like you said, there's a lot of topics at ITU at the moment and generally around the world for satellite, but I hope it provides a little bit of a satellite perspective. Okay.
Next up is Detlef. So welcome, Detlef. He's Director of Spectrum Management and Regulatory Affairs, Europe, Middle East and Africa in the CTO office at HPE Networking. He managed the spectrum engineering activities of the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, where he established the Radio Spectrum Lab's position as trusted source of radio compatibility studies. Welcome, Detlef.
Yes, hello, good morning, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to this event here and giving me the opportunity to present on wireless connectivity in the enterprise. So maybe up front, a few words about HPE. I think most people here by now know that HPE is not the company that is producing printers and computers for 10 years after the split of HP Inc. and HPE. So we are in the different say. I'm with the HPE Networking, which is actually not a combination of the HPE Aruba networking parts and the HPE Juniper networking. We know that HPE acquired Juniper Networks last year, and the closing the deal took a bit longer than expected, but that happened in July this year. So that actually makes us a company of $9 billion revenues per quarter and a market share of the enterprise wireless LAN market of 21%. And we have a broad portfolio of wireless LAN products covering actually all bands, all locations, all major use cases. And this is not only Wi-Fi. Sometimes we are labeled as a Wi-Fi, part of the Wi-Fi industry, but we are not actually a member of the networking industry, and we have private 5G as well as Wi-Fi. So, and private 5G is an important element, I would say, of enterprise connectivity, although it is, as we also heard before, it is still relatively small compared to Wi-Fi. I mean, Wi-Fi enterprise networks, that's really the part of our networks, 2.4, 5, 6 gigahertz increasingly are very important. And here you just see like a range of use cases or segments or sectors that are addressed. And for many people actually in policymakers in particular, definitely not Ofcom. I know you're well informed of what Wi-Fi does in the enterprise, but for many people there, Wi-Fi still is like the best effort consumer type of wireless connectivity, which definitely is not the case. So here we have these complementary technologies, private 5G and Wi-Fi, which are operating in different bands and which are taking different roads and covering different use cases, actually. So private 5G is more for wide area coverage and mobility, and Wi-Fi is really for a high capacity indoor coverage. Now, if you look at the enterprise wireless LAN market, and these are actually figures from IDC from June, it shows the year-on-year growth in the different regions. What I found quite interesting, if you look at the growth rates, there is some correlation, it seems, between the amount of spectrum that is being made available for Wi-Fi or for wireless LAN 6 gigahertz band. In the US, we know we have the entire band available. In the Americas, we have part of it. In Europe, Middle East and Africa, only I think one country that opens the entire band, 6 gigahertz band, Saudi Arabia. So there you have the highest growth rate in the States, and then the Americas, and Asia Pac, there's South Korea, and look, we have Kazakhstan as well, which is on the border. And then in China, we have negative growth actually. So, well, could be coincidence or not, but I found this interesting. Now let me talk a little bit about standard power Wi-Fi. We heard a bit of that already today, and that's also an important, I would say, new technology and new use case for Wi-Fi. Here, this map shows you the situation or the status of authorization of standard power Wi-Fi plus AFC. Well, obviously in the US and Canada, it's already being deployed and was done. Regulation was fixed quite some time ago. We have other countries where they evaluate the use of standard power Wi-Fi and AFC, and some countries have proposed regulations. So Saudi Arabia is one of those cases where they actually announced that they will allow standard power Wi-Fi and AFC, and they have not yet published a complete regulation. They also announced that for the end of this year, we see. But I know that there's lots of activities going on there, and there's very strong interest in standard power and AFC. Okay, there's a couple of other countries in Europe. You know, we also heard about that. CPT, Communications Committee, is working on authorizing standard power Wi-Fi plus AFC, which is called differently. I think I've got a slide on that, but let me talk about that. And we have the chairwoman of FM61 who is working on that subject here. Find the regulations. We have FT45 that is developing technical conditions for authorizing standard power was RLAN, as they call it, and coordination function for spectrum access. Now, where do we stand today in terms of actual deployments? You probably saw that announcement of Notre Dame University in the US, where they have also a large stadium where HPE Aruba is providing the standard power network and AFC. Also in combination, I have to say, with a 5G network, it's actually complementary technologies. So it's actually quite a large network of 1,100 indoor and outer access points. So we have lots of different services being provided, not only, of course, to the spectators, but also to the entire back end. Yes. So this is, to my knowledge, the first major standard power and AFC deployment. Yeah. Okay, now, well, it was already about the 6 gigahertz band, of course, no presentation, almost no presentation without 6 gigahertz. 6 gigahertz is, of course, a very important subject for us and what's going to happen with the 6 gigahertz band in the future. So what we see here is that the use of the 6 gigahertz band is growing fast, not only in the US, obviously, first, but also even in Europe. So in enterprise settings, we now see that more than 40% of the total Wi-Fi traffic there is going over 6 gigahertz. There's lots of projects going on for 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi, particularly, of course, in the US and in Saudi Arabia, but also in other. Well, we've heard a bit of noise over the past couple of months from the mobile industry. I would say that utilization of the 6 gigahertz, the lower 6 gigahertz band in Europe, but also in other countries was very low. So there was no need, no interest, and so on. For Europe, the situation is interesting because the big operators, big fixed network operators, are also the biggest mobile network operators. They always claim that it's them that are providing most Wi-Fi routers, access points to their customers, and they say there's no interest. But if I look at the example of Germany, there's after 4.5 years after the lower band was opened, only one of the 4 big operators is offering only one model of a 6 gigahertz router, which somewhat explains why there's a relatively little usage in the consumer space. Definitely different in the enterprise space. So again, what's going to happen with the upper 6 gigahertz? in Europe is still relatively unclear. We heard about the Radio Spectrum Policy Group and the decision. So they don't take a decision. They express an opinion in November with a recommendation of how this upper 6 GHz band is to be used. But what we hear is, of course, different administrations take different views. There is, I have to say, in Europe, a grand coalition of stakeholders is advocating for the making the entire upper 6 GHz band available. And there's not the Wi-Fi industry, the networking industry. These are many fixed network operators. These are, like in Germany, the associations of the communities, of energy providers, etc., etc. So there's really I would say, a coalition of thousands of institutions and companies advocating for making the upper 6 GHz band completely available for Wi-Fi use. But we'll find out. Okay, that was it from my side. Thank you.
And I think this will be the last presentation before the panel session, and it's you, Wolfgang. It's Wolfgang Belz, my colleague at Shure. Throughout his career at Shure, he's gained valuable experience while working in various departments, including engineering, project management, global product management, compliance and regulation. He's a member of our Spectrum Regulatory Affairs team, responsible for overseeing activities in the European region, and he co-chairs the PMSC industry organisation at apwpt.org and sits on the DEC Forum board. So welcome, Wolfgang. You've got a couple of slides on what's going on in, well, I'll be quiet. I don't want to say
Yeah, thank you very much. Okie dokie. So I think Martin gave you a very nice overview about PMC in general, and we had a short discussion about what's happening in Germany. Special use case, military in the band for 70 to 604 MHz. And this is where I now zoom in a little bit and give you more insight, more background. So it is new sharing scenarios for audio PMC devices in 470 to 964 MHz. So actually what happens on the WRC 27, so DTT service keeps to be the only primary service in the band 470 to 694 MHz. So there was no change here. So many people were thinking, okay, no change, so very perfect. No, actually there was a change, and the change was that the regulation permit the allocation of the band to other mobile services and applications. So other mobile services, so what I explained beforehand already, so we have could be mobile INT, supplementary downlink channels maybe, could be mobile military, mobile PBDR, and we have the incumbent user mobile PMC in there. So it provides a little bit of flexibility to the administration. And actually what happened, so Germany has launched a project to allow additional mobile users alongside PMC, limited to military. So what they actually, it's not a proposal, it's a statement in the official Gazette. We talked about that. So this is a very rough translation. So saying, when operating PMC radio applications, restrictions may apply in the area listed below in the TV zone of the band 470 to 510 MHz range, if it is not used by broadcasting service, because this keeps primary. The geographical coordination, and you see a radius of approximately 23 kilometers. Means in this area, radio microphones could observe interference. Obviously, wireless microphones with our low power of 50 milliwatts, we will not hurt the military high power user. So it's all about PMC. They offer that you could apply for short-term frequency license for larger events. Means in case there is a very large event, PMC user can apply for a license, and then the German authority would coordinate with the military, so shut off for this weekend, for this week, because there is a very large event, which of course creates very nice question. So we are same, from a regulatory point of view, the same level, military, we are also both are secondary users, but we should pay for something. while the others just switch on or off when they want. And this is where I'm now going into. First of all, an oversight. So what you see here, this is the area. So the coordination points to the small village here, which is a military base. And then we have the circle of 23 kilometers, and you see it's touching Munich. So many of our users getting very nervous because, and I think this is one important point here. The second bullet point: new systems cannot be detected, are not scannable by PMC. So these devices, they're using different kind of modulation schemes, and we cannot detect them. Means if we have our wireless microphones running, what we typically do, we do a scan of the RF environment, see, okay, is the TV channel there? Is something else going on? Select the right frequency. We might select a very nice frequency and suddenly, because we don't see them, just hear the interference. And that's a big issue for our users. And of course, the question what we are raising is, so this military base has a diameter of 4 kilometers. Why do they need 23 kilometers as some kind of not protection area, but some kind of you might have interference area. So why not limit their RF power to a limit which covers the 4 kilometer, and that's it? Much better way forward from our point of view. And so the next steps, what we want to do is we would like to perform some reality checks. So really see what does it mean. Definitely there might be, we know there is a difference between indoor and outdoor. So we want to understand what does it mean. And if this 23 kilometer diameters is what we hear, it's worst case scenario. So for us, it's important, what is the real scenario? So we want to understand that. And of course, a really high concern is how many locations will be added. So if you think about, will not be the case, but if you look on Google and search for military base in Germany, you find a list of 600. If you think about 600 for the circle, so this frequency band would be gone. There will be no 600, but there will be a few more, which is not that many. But of course, it's finally a risky area for audio PMC operations starting now. And going beyond that, so we have seen an RSPG workshop. The NATO reps were telling there's a nice case in Germany, and maybe we look it up for NATO. And so what happens is that what is actually true, so the devices which will be used are defined NATO RF equipment. So it's not German specialized RF devices, it is NATO equipment. It of course makes sense somehow, but for us, of course, it's a worst case if you think about this is now European-wide. You have many of these circles, which is, creates a lot of risk, which we cannot define right now how much risk it is, what happens really, really high concerns about the development here. What I would like to add is, in addition, I think Prakash mentioned it, we were part of the discussion, yes. So a good step is that the military and the German administration connected to us and were asking, can we do some sharing study analysis? My colleague Axel was part of it, so some sharing analysis, studies, theoretical. And then suddenly we saw this statement in official gazette, but fortunately not notified beforehand that this is happening now. It's just one location, a few others coming. This was the short intro into this special case, and we can discuss also. I think maybe there's a question here or later in the networking session after that in lunchtime.
Yeah, thank you, Wolfgang. Move straight into the panel session. I think
Do you need
by,
chairs?
by my calculation, we're 3 short. So if we can grab that one on the end and it's 2. Put one this one. And while we're doing that, I'll introduce you, Nada. So everyone else I've introduced. My colleague Nada Abdel Hafez is the head of Spectrum and Regulatory Affairs for the Middle East, Africa and India at Shaw Incorporated. Her work involves close collaboration with administrations, regulatory authorities and policymakers to facilitate embassy operations throughout the MEA region in India. So thanks for moderating, Nada. I think we've got Alex, Richard, Juan, Kevin, Detlef. There he is. I thought I got a lot of my maths wrong. I think we're due to finish at 1, so that's a good half hour. Okay. I don't think, if people,
We can go a bit.
if people want to run on, I mean, it's just only lunch waiting for us afterwards, so go as long as you like.
Oh, thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming here, and it's a pleasure to have you all at Shure, and thank you for the insights, the presentations. I'm pretty sure that everyone has a lot of questions since we're not able to ask during the presentations, and I'm lucky to have you all for half an hour for myself. So I'll start by the order of the presentations. You started, I think, Alex, you had the first presentation, and to me, I have like one key point that you mentioned. You covered the future of the broadcast TV a lot, regardless, if it's depending on the delivery. And again, we heard from Ofcom as well in one of the options that the broadcast, we expect certain innovations within the technology itself. So can you shed some light on the innovation in these technologies and broadcasting? And then what advantages do we see, considering you also mentioned in the future that we anticipate 99% of IP connectivity? So to me, it's a little bit strange to mention these both statements at the same time. Like, what advantages do we have from the new broadcasting innovations over IP in the future?
Yeah, so I think this kind of raises a separate topic in terms of that there's a lot of different kind of scenarios that are going on in Europe, UK, and lots of other places. We talked about the regions for the spectrum, and everyone's in kind of different scenarios. So in the UK, we're looking at potentially moving to all IP broadcast, all IP TV delivery, and for that, we're mainly looking at, okay, well, how could you manage all of that delivery over the internet network? So kind of using multicast, there's innovations in that, creating ensuring there's low latency, ensuring people can access services correctly, ensuring public service prominence. So that's all the kind of things we're looking at. Whereas in Europe, France have kind of started using 4K HDR on their multiplexes for broadcast. So they're kind of looking at it in a different way. They're going to invest in the broadcast networks and maybe start using that to innovate. So yeah, there's a real kind of mixture of use cases and kind of situations that people are in at the moment. Our job at the DTG is really just to kind of ensure that the industry goes along in a coherent direction. So we create a standard called DBOOK, and in that we include support for HEVC for all the latest audio formats for HDR. So if there was a situation where we need to move to kind of a new technology, the TVs will support that and the ecosystem is there. So that's our kind of role in the industry, to kind of make sure there's a kind of preparedness for whatever we need to do in the future. And so yeah, in terms of spectrum, obviously that means that, when spectrum decisions are being made, there are opportunities to kind of go in different directions because we've laid that groundwork for, well, what's going to come next. But then the question is, how do you rationalize it across all of the different kind of, I guess, levels where people are at? That's the kind of difficulty, I think, for regulators and for the people making the decisions around spectrum.
Thank you, Alex. So moving on to Richard. Richard, you showed us the very controversial graph of the decrease in the data growth. So my question really is it really related to that saturation of connected users or devices? Could that be why we're not seeing the increase in the data growth as we're seeing it over the past years?
I think it was maybe more controversial last year. I think there's an acceptance now that this is happening. And even Ericsson, they keep downgrading their numbers, their predictions. I think there's an acknowledgement that growth rates are going down. And I think it's caused by what you described. I mean, I think habits are entrenched. I only watch so many cat videos in the day, and that's not really changing. So I think that's a good reason for why that's happening.
Okay. Juan, so you've also covered the D2D. I want to get a bit more in details about, D2D and moving on to that subject. You mentioned that one of the aspiring objectives for D2D is to provide coverage for rural areas. We've been hearing that a lot from the mobile or even the satellite industry. How do you see D2D really delivering that objective, given the increase in cost, which is most of the time the reason why we still don't have coverage in the underserved areas, which is the cost on the MNOs or other satellite providers. So how do you really see D2D tackling that a challenge?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's going to depend on how the industry evolves, right? For example, I think that satellite broadband is actually, the one that has the real chance of changing a little bit the landscape of rural connectivity, right? And then if you have the same companies providing also direct to device, or they begin getting new customers and bringing new customers into the satellite service industry, then maybe that's the hook to start providing also the same connectivity directly to the phones, right? But as some of the numbers that I was showing before, let's see how good the technology can actually get to, right? Because we still don't know. We still have, Kevin was saying, right? The iPhone 14 and onwards, they have these emergency communications messaging application, and that's more or less all we've seen for now. And it's been 3 years, right? So I'm not complaining. It's already an important new application, but we still need to see how it actually evolves to be able to assess what impact it can have, right? That's why I think maybe more than bringing new users to connectivity, we see some other applications, that they look more attractive or with more potential, right? Like emergency communications and the impact that alone can have in the economy or in the industry. Yeah.
So it's also like with providing new services, not just like covering the rural areas for now. Do you think that this is where?
Yeah, it's about the applications, I would say, right? The use cases of the technology. Maybe the technology surprised us, and it's also about new services, but I think it's going to be more about the use cases. Yeah.
Kevin, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think some of the trending sectors right now, we talk about D2D, but there's a larger, let's say, NTN, and non-terrestrial network component to it. Direct to device is very trendy because it could be, if there is a possibility to connect phones and you go outside of your terrestrial coverage and straight away you're still connected, that sounds amazing. And perhaps in the future, well, when it develops, it to have that connectivity, it's possible. But broadly speaking, I think there's a bigger interest as well in just connected everywhere, like cars, aircrafts, and the standardization in having this 5G type or anywhere in these applications, like for connected cars. I think connected cars is one of the big things that we're trying to achieve as well in the satellite industry. And slowly we're going to go down and down in devices. That's what I expect. For direct to device, there are some key, technical difficulties as well. So you need constellations that are very low in altitude for latency purposes, for the kind of throughput that you have. But the lower you have a constellation, the more satellites you need to have a robust coverage. So there are some things that need to be answered in terms of technology. Now, in terms of why would it be interesting to develop these services? I think generally speaking, there's an incentive for the mobile community and mobile operators to embrace this because in every country they have their targets to meet in terms of coverage, connectivity, and they pay a certain tax, universal service funds in a lot of countries. So there could be a way to incentivize these further connectivity in rural areas by changing regulations or incentivizing through the universal service fund contribution, perhaps a way to partner with these satellites to expand their coverage. So just thinking for now, it's still a new sector, but it's definitely why there is so many possibilities and why we're seeing so many actors in there. In the future, what it would look like if there is multiple satellite, I think there's a lot of satellite operators right now that are into it. SES is also looking with their partnership with Link, and now Link with Omnispace. There is a lot of dynamic. It's very dynamic. We'll see what comes out. I think out of all these discussions in the next few years, I would say. Like,
can I ask one question? I thought your economic modeling number is really interesting. Was it 6% of the revenue would be for connecting unconnected people? Is that right? Like 6%.
So no, the numbers that we have is we estimated the potential revenue with a range, which was like I think between 3 billion and 16 billion. That's what we are seeing for now. And then what we see is the was 60 billion of growth in global GDP if you bring portion of the people that are unconnected because of living outside the coverage area, right? So because if we have today, let's say 350 million people living outside the cellular area, it's not that because this technology works, everyone will connect, right? And everyone will use it the same way. So yeah.
The biggest driver of revenue will be the premium added connectivity everywhere.
I mean,
rather than the connect people who've never been connected.
Yeah, for sure. As far as we can see today and estimate how these users can go, definitely. Yeah, it's niche users, you know, the typical pictures that people use in the papers are hikers and people in the middle of the mountain connecting with a cellular phone and stuff like that. For now, especially thinking that for 3 years, we only have some short messaging and stuff.
Yeah. I think that's just because those people is that just why it's a smaller market?
Yeah, I mean, for now, yes, and I think it's probably going to be an expensive extra, right, to have. Unless some operators, which is what I think they will do, is they start to offer it for free. Right? For example, Globosat and Apple is for free, right? And even from a regulatory perspective, it's a good strategy because you're not selling a service, so no one cares, right? And they let you do it and develop the technology in the middle. If you start making money and the government wants to raise taxes out of it, check it, then that's different. I don't know, maybe the new satellite operators, they start, I'm thinking about Amazon Kuiper, right? Which is coming soon. They have so many Amazon clients, so who knows what the commercial strategy may be, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So moving on a bit to 6G and 6 gigahertz and Wi-Fi. So Detlef, I have noticed a very interesting comment in one of your slides, which is we mentioned that in EMEA that a lot of MNOs are withholding Wi-Fi devices from their customers. So coming maybe from an MNO background, I found this quite interesting to see why MNOs could still have spectrum in the full band, whether it's INT or Wi-Fi, they could still provide services in both domains. Why do you think MNOs would want to not offer Wi-Fi 6G while they can also not pay for the spectrum, but still have access to their consumers?
Well, yeah, I think as I said, so the big operators, fixed network operators are at the same time also the biggest mobile operators. And I think they all have sort of internal conflicts between groups with different objectives. And typically when we talk about spectrum, well, you always have the mobile groups apparently present in those discussions, and they have their objectives and they follow their objectives. So you could, yeah, definitely, it's a good question. Why the operators don't really push 6 gigahertz? I mean, you can understand it if the strategy is okay. We want the upper band for mobile, then the fixed network part does not roll out 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi in the lower part, just to demonstrate. I mean, as they try to do that, there's no demand, I would say. I think what they're trying to do. Well, let's not speculate for the actual motives why this position is taken about the 6 gigahertz band, but we see that the pure mobile is not really a big driver of revenue, and the mobile operators have always been complaining about the low average revenue per user that they get from, if you want, pure mobile services. For them, fixed wireless access is definitely more attractive. So probably they're trying to push fixed wireless access using the upper 6 gigahertz band. Although it, from my point of view, it doesn't make any sense because we are looking at the dense urban areas which are targeted by that, which would be 100% covered by fiber, which is a much superior technology. I would say also from the performance point of view in terms of data rates, it can be delivered in both directions, downlink and uplink, which is very important. It's getting more and more important to have symmetric, I would say, data rates, which the fixed wireless access cannot deliver. And then also from an, I would say, sustainability point of view, because the concept of blasting very high powers into indoor environments to cover them isn't really very efficient.
Can I ask a question? In countries where you have unlicensed the whole 6 gigahertz band, like you mentioned Saudi, the US, the equipment that is being deployed, the Wi-Fi equipment, it's for the full band?
It is, yes.
It is.
It is.
So now you may have, I don't know, 5 million devices in the US using the whole band.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. That's very interesting because then,
five.
yeah, no, I just said 5 million just in case, but it's interesting how if the global trend ends up being just using the lower part of the band and not the higher, then what do you do with 20 million devices in the country, right? And it's going to be something interesting to watch as the whole 6 gigahertz issue continues to be debated, right?
Yeah, I had a question with this Wi-Fi versus 5G, 6G mobile operators. The end goal is the same, right? When we're at home, we have Wi-Fi, but sometimes you switch off, you're on 5G, but basically the output is just you're connected, right? That's what we're trying to do either with Wi-Fi or with 5G that we have available in cities. For example, if I were to push this argument to the maximum, what would prevent Wi-Fi from increasing powers? And then you would have Wi-Fi from every building spilling over in the streets and people having for each Wi-Fi router a little bit of bandwidth available for people roaming around. It could, in theory, achieve the same as 5G, connecting outdoors people everywhere, right? If you have like your membership. So we have two technologies that for me are doing pretty much the same thing. They're connected to a terrestrial fiber and extending the coverage to wirelessly to devices. So I was wondering, why is there not collaboration between the two industries to use both technologies in order to find a solution that could benefit both? Or is it just because they're fighting for a market, both of them the same market?
Yeah, well, probably that's an explanation. Yeah, I think 5G and Wi-Fi is really are fairly complementary. I mean, 5G is good outdoors and for mobility, etc., and Wi-Fi is for indoors. Yes, you could increase the transmit power of Wi-Fi indoors and then say it will spill over. But I mean, there have been lots and lots of studies about coexistence between Wi-Fi and incumbent services. So And Wi-Fi was designed to share the band with other services and really share, I mean, operate at the same time. So, and the reason why Wi-Fi so far has been limited to low power and indoor is just not to cause any interference to the fixed links, the satellite services, and whatever else is in this band. So there, again, there's quite some complementarity. But what I would agree and what I would think regulators should push for is really to really use both technologies at their best and to really be complementary. Like if you, for instance, you're outdoors and use 5G, then you go indoors where 5G coverage from outdoor base stations is of course very poor. You do the handover. I mean, it's being done for voice over Wi-Fi, for instance. If you move indoors, then you transfer your telephony to Wi-Fi. Not for data, actually. It's in the US. It's more popular. I mean, you have Passport and open roaming and things like this. In Europe, not yet. And this is something I think that probably regulators could push more, really, to have these different technologies work together better and use them more efficiently.
But for the mobile operators, I heard that for airports, for example, and so on, apparently they have solutions indoor base stations as well that they want to deploy. And if you go to certain countries in Europe, sometimes you have a Wi-Fi for the city as well. So I see you're right in the sense right now, up to now, they've been really isolated indoors, outdoors, a little bit like that. So, but ultimately, we seem that there seems to be a shrinking or merging in the fact that they want to provide that service to everyone. Yeah, they seem to want the same share of the pie, basically. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I understand why, because both of them want a bigger part of the market, I guess.
Okay, so I'll move on to Wolfgang, another topic. Wolfgang, so you shared with us like the use case within the German military. How do you foresee that expanding to other countries in Europe and potentially even playing a role in the upcoming WRC 2031 that the military would also want to get a slice of that spectrum? Do you see that evolving or?
Yeah, I think as I started my presentation, I was saying it's following the general idea that other secondary services can go into the band. So it might be that different administrations have different views, what they want to do. And but talking about military itself, I think, of course, as I mentioned before, it's a NATO stuff idea. And we know there are some instances in Europe which is very supportive for military going forward, supporting military actions. So they have a strong voice right now. So I expect that other countries will look into that. And there's definitely, without being part of the discussion, as it is a closed, of course, military discussion, but I'm definitely sure that there is a NATO discussion to expand this for complete NATO countries. So even not only in Europe.
Can I ask a question? You said it's a NATO technology or system.
Yeah, NATO approved devices.
Why is it only in Germany that we're seeing it?
I think there are other countries, this depends on the national ruling. So there might be, maybe Andrea can say something about that. There are different countries, there are different rulings. So in Germany, as an example, the military cannot do any action in the country. If I see in France, military is actually allowed to do supportive action in the country. And it's different by country. And this is also how they use the equipment. So in some countries, they might use it already somehow. In Germany, it has to go the official way. And so that's, and they must do it publicly. So they do that. But this gives a very nice example, and other countries will pick it up. So it's as always, if a large country in Europe shows the example and yes, it works, others will follow. I expect that, yes.
Thank you. So I have a question in mind really for all the panelists that kind of emerged from our discussion from sharing. And what really triggered me was maybe Kevin, your slide on the 3.8 to 4 gigahertz and showing how we see an increase in the 5G private network. How has that setup really impacted satellite in terms of do we see change in the demand for 3.8? Do we see a decrease? Because again, we have an increase in the 5G private deployments, and I believe GSA have also released a report on the increase of these private networks across the world. So my question really, can spectrum sharing really give this field for the services to compete over who's going to continue to exist? Is it like basically like you're in the wild and you're allowed to share, but depending on how much demand you have and how much you penetrate the market? So can you comment at least from the satellite side?
So on the satellite side and the CPT experience in Europe, 3.8 to 4.2 in the mandate of the European Commission, it's clearly stated that it's a safe haven for FSS. So they foresee that they will continue to preserve this for access to FSS. But on the practical side, you're right. If there is a lot of demand and a lot of deployments for private networks everywhere, in the end, you still have to share the band. There still needs to be certain distances of utilization between an FSS base station and a private networks, even if at lower power. So that was one of the points that Jesua made during the consultation, is how do we, because they kept using the word ensure the future of the future protection of FSS and the band. So how do you ensure it if you kind of widespread, slowly imagine a scenario where there is demand everywhere for private networks? How do you ensure that tomorrow FSS user comes in and says, I would like to deploy a newer station here, can I? No, you can't, because we provided a license to a private user. So right now they have priority for X amount of years. So this comes back to the regulator trying to balance out the needs of both. Right now, the regulation is quite clear that they should be able to still be a future of the usage, but you're right, it evolves every day. So if they see that the trend is growing, more and more there's need. Right now, the experience is that there are limited use cases, and they're in the hundreds in the country, which is still very much manageable. When we have maybe in a single country, we might have a limited number of gateways. It's still very much manageable. But you're right, in the future, how does that work? Needs to be really set, well set into knowing where these users are, and trusting the regulator to do these checks every time you have a license application. It comes also to the point I was saying that you cannot have a blanket license operations for sharing, because then if you have blanket, then people can deploy anywhere. Then you have this issue where you do not check compliance or interference. So it's a bit more regulatorily heavy as a framework than just the current frameworks where you have spectrum for one user, but at least you make the most out of the band.
Thank you, Kevin. So any other person would like to comment on this, the concept basically of spectrum sharing over time might favor one service over the other? I'm not sure if they're maybe in the 6 gigahertz domain.
Sorry, I couldn't understand your question very well. Could you just say it?
So what I'm trying to say is, like, with spectrum sharing over a period of time, allow for some services to overcome the others based on the demand? And can you kind of project this into the Wi-Fi, 5G discussion, especially in countries that that have allocated the full band for both services?
I think I don't know, just an example from the TV industry, I think we heard before, it's very difficult to implement sharing. We did that in the TV band. DTG worked on that with Ofcom for TV white space. And the reality, there was a framework set up, and there was the licenses, and there was databases, and it was all there in place. But the reality was it was very difficult to provide fair access, because incumbent users required the spectrum, and then what was left over was perhaps not enough certainty for the white space device users. So Yeah, I think that shows the reality of finding that balance is very difficult. And like you said, it can end up favouring certain users of the band, and it's how you set those conditions. So yeah, it's certainly, but like I think Martin was saying, sensing and sharing and different ways of accessing spectrum is going to have to be some way we do that going forward, because there's always competing demands. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked into more, I think.
And if I think about the regulation, of course, you have to also think about what are the special needs of the different users. So for our case, wireless microphone, when I switch it on, it has to work, and it's a streaming real time. So any interference will hurt the actual audio. In other, like Wi-Fi or 6G, 5G, they might be able to resend the package. We can't do that. So far, when we talk about sharing, it has to provide some reliability for our use case. So, and this is always, so sharing in general, you cannot make a statement on that. It depends heavily on the use case, on the frequency band, on the users, what are the applications, and their differences. So yeah.
So yeah, the CBRS is a good example, obviously, of it working, similar kind of concepts, but that's because the conditions allow it, like Wolfgang's saying. So yeah, it's difficult to find one solution that fits everyone and for a sharing framework. So until perhaps, I don't know, we can have some automatic way of sensing and dynamically allocating networks, yeah, having a database approach only works in certain scenarios.
But we learned also with the TV white space discussion that sensing is not, it's not a solution, it doesn't work. It's not working.
Well, yeah, it wasn't 10 years ago or whatever, but yeah, I don't know whether you could do something different, 6G or whatever's coming up. But yeah, when TV white space came out, it didn't.
Yeah, once I can understand that PMC have very stringent performance requirements or quality requirements, but also on the Wi-Fi side, I mean, we're talking about Wi-Fi enterprise networks, and depending on what sort of network you have, like a hospital network, for instance, we have customers that are running large hospital networks with a variety of services, hundreds of different services, and they have some very strict quality requirements as well. And if you're now talking about the 6 gigahertz band, and we are talking about prioritization of spectrum, one part for IMT, the other for Wi-Fi, let's say. But if you have a network which is really using the Wi-Fi network, the entire band, which needs the entire band, and it can use it because there will be no IMT in that area. But then if someday somebody sets up an IMT base station next door, and then Wi-Fi will have to vacate all the bands that will be used by IMT, this is going to create a serious problem. This has to be considered as well, of course.
So, Martin, do we have time for more questions, so we can get the
Yeah, I
audience?
mean, it's up to you guys. I mean, it's
let's just take some
5 past, but I think we can keep going for it.
So my next question would be to Juan.
Nada, let's take
Oh.
a question from the floor.
Oh, then, sorry, from my understanding.
I have questions, I think others too. So
Okay, so please, anyone has any questions?
you go
start.
first. Kevin, so you had this chart about the GSOA members, correct? I don't know if Kuiper or SpaceX are part of GSOA.
Is Amazon is part of GSOA, SpaceX is not.
Okay, so yeah, I spent a lot of time in the mobile industry. A lot of consolidation happened. Like a lot of us come from Motorola, Nokia, Nortel, Alcatel, Lucent. I can go on forever. I think at some point, I think there's going to be some consolidation. But just a comment. The question I have is on the C-band. And even maybe the UHF, at least that's the US, maybe perspectives, correct? Broadcasters there, and even the satellite industry. And I was heavily involved with 600 megahertz auction and the C-band auction, working for Nokia back then. Both broadcasters and satellite industry said no until there was incentives for them to sell spectrum, $10 billion, $12 billion, and they said no until they said yes, correct? So I have a question for the C-band is, they can no longer operate in the 3.7 to 3.98 in the US.
Yeah, currently.
So how does it work then? Because satellite don't just cover the US, correct? So like we're heavily involved with SES. I work with the colleagues in US. So are the satellites then covering like whole thing, or now when you put new satellites, are you just covering the 3.98 and above? How does it work?
Yeah, it depends. You have to take the usage around the region, of course, when you put it, and then it will depend the antenna you put there. So is it a regional beam, or is it more well, more specifically for the US? And then you could have multiple carriers. Some carriers will be for sure in 4.2 for the US because we cannot operate below. And now there's still now it's opening again for another 100 megahertz or more in the US. But we still have users from in Latin America, if I were to say, pretty sure above 3.7. It's still very, very much we have users there. Colombia, Brazil, at least for SES, are still heavily reliant there. Just because, you know, for distribution, C-band is for tropical countries, we cannot do without for high reliability, like 999s type of communication. That's what we need for those countries. Now, for incentives, yeah, of course, it costs a lot of money to also deploy all the Earth stations in the US. When we did the migration, for example, you had to have teams there on the ground to actually switch up for all the customers the antennas. Some of them went to KU band instead, for example, or KA band. So they switched frequency entirely because you cannot accommodate the same amount of people in a reduced amount of spectrum. And then when you send up new satellites, then yes, of course, it's going to be an assessment whether it's worth sending a satellite for 15 years if you have uncertainty or just a reduced amount of spectrum. So that's all under consideration.
You're going to go for another cycle in the US, changing filters again? And
well, for now, it's reopened, yeah. So there's discussion, they want to go higher. The big beautiful bill is talking about minimum of 100 megahertz more. So yeah, we're following these discussions for sure to see how it pans out.
Thank you. Okay. So
I have a comment. I think just reflecting on what you were talking, maybe the new LEO constellations may change some of these scenarios when we think about what we can change, what we can reform, etc. Because I remember when Starlink, they launch every week almost satellites, and then they wanted to show that they were going to also offer D2D, and suddenly the next batch of satellites, they were 40 satellites about D2D. I think if and when the LEO industry evolves and the whole satellite industry evolves into more LEO, then maybe the satellite industry will be able to react quickly if the incentives are there to these type of changes. And that may change a little bit the dynamic that we have, you know, when we need to sit down with a satellite operator who spent $400 million on a satellite and say, hey, you need to move because this is happening. I think maybe the reaction that the industry will have in the future with LEO constellations may be different.
I would agree with you, but again, for these types of constellation, yes, it's just the amount of capital SpaceX has compared to the rest of the industry is crazy. So yes, they can react quickly. There's the lifetime of their satellites, 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's true that they need to send more and more, but at those altitudes, they need to send thousands to achieve the same coverage.
Yeah.
So it's still quite expensive as well. It's maybe less so, but they can react more quickly. I would agree, but it's still quite expensive as well.
Yeah, you had a question.
So, I mean, the discussion in D2D, I think from a kind of engineering physics point of view, it is going to continue to be very low bit rate going up. And I'm kind of feeling that some of the discussion about the opportunity for, you know, base stations in the sky, it's just not a mobile technology yet because it's you know, high power consumption, brilliant terminals, and in terms of fixed access, it is fantastic. But if you want to be mobile, like moving around, I just feel it's not, and I think it's going to be a long time before it's anything more than a few kilobits up. It's 100 miles away minimum, unless you have a terminal. You know, it's not going to be this device, the handset. And of course, if you have a terminal that works, and the terminals are great and they can get powered up. So I just feel that satellite is all about bringing connectivity to the ground, and then we'll use 3.8, 4.2, or whatever else, and spread it around in the ground. And I kind of look back, I like looking back, you know, Iridium, if anyone remembers what happened with Iridium and so on. So I just feel it's not going to be mobile for a long time going up.
So in the TV industry, a lot of the use cases for the satellite are going to be for a video contribution for Leo supporting that kind of thing for production. But 5G Emerge is a project that's starting now, which is to try and create a network between 5G and satellite where you can deliver TV content, depending whether it's needed to be kind of niche content or broadcast content. You can just kind of seamlessly go over whichever network is most effective, and then have gateways in people's houses to distribute content. So, so yeah, like you were saying there, it's probably not to do with kind of your handset. It's more to do with kind of yeah, delivering kind of across wider areas to bigger audiences, that kind of thing. And yeah, the handsets themselves probably not going to be able to have too much interaction with their satellite.
I think as you said, the emergency is brilliant though. I mean, that's fantastic that you could be anywhere with your iPhone and it can push up on whatever channel that, you know, emergency response. So there's definitely use cases, but I don't think it's mobile for a while. You know, put it fixed in the ground, that's great, but it's not.
Yeah, so I was surprised by the revenue figures that you show on D2D, and this is also another aspect where we may not get what we are promised, right? Because the revenue does not seem to be very appealing. Is this revenue only about commercial D2D? Because there is also a lot of interest by the military or the governmental. Also, I would imagine that for emergency, if there is a big gain for there was a 100 billion for disaster, things like this. So it can be heavily subsidized. So is those figures only for commercial services?
Yeah.
It was not including military or
it didn't include
governmental subsidized.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't include the military or institutional money. It's about bringing the hikers, the niche use cases, and us as mobile users, you know, paying an extra for having D2D. And I agree. I think I understand why some other numbers have to be huge, and it's part of the strategy. But at least for now, considering what the phones can actually do and how they can perform, yeah, we haven't seen a lot of revenue.
So it's definitively a dual mode technology. At least SpaceX, it's pretty clear that they are going after not only consumers, but really about.
Yeah, I think so. And we were talking with Kevin before. Like then you put the money that they just paid for the 2 GHz spectrum, and it's more than our numbers for the whole planet. So they must be thinking about something that maybe I am not. But,
yeah, they paid 20 billion for the EchoStar spectrum in the US.
And you tend to think that it's not that they just pay too much. They must be having some analysis of what they are going to use it for, or what are the use cases that they're seeing, or what is the technology that they are developing. Yeah, but for now, for what we can actually see and then make an assessment with what we can see, yeah, we agree that in the next at least 5 years, 10 years.
Maybe you get part of that, PJ. Your company was bought by EchoStar, right?
Yes. So we are very familiar with this 19 billion, not 20. It was 17 and 2 for debt.
Yeah, it's true. 1 billion rounding is still a lot.
You take it.
Still a lot of money.
Any other question online, maybe? Yeah.
No question online.
Kevin, what is the increase on the UE for the D2D communication? That the UE can reach that satellite?
That
20
I haven't followed the technical discussions behind it. I just know that it has existed for a while now, IoT applications. So there is definitely a way to communicate with the satellites. The amount of the speed at which you're going to do it, yeah, I think there is a difference in the frequencies that you use, and so that I don't know the details as of yet. I would need to go deeply into the discussions and the technical discussions, which I have not followed in that much detail, and go to 3GPP, because today in 3GPP there's already SNL bands that are there. KA has been discussed already, KA band as well for NTN integration. So it's not necessarily for devices, but to have 5G type services for reaching different types of antennas. And KU band is also being discussed. So we're integrating between these. That's why I was emphasizing D2D is just one aspect of it. Now we're talking more about NTN, so more using the same type of equipment that you have terrestrially available, just to have the same economies of scale, because they're building so many of those. So we would like to connect directly with what is available on the market as well in satellite. Everything was proprietary up to now. Now it's changing slowly.
Okay, great. Then I think we can close from here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the audience.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say a few closing words. Thanks to all our guests and speakers. I won't name you individually. I think the sandwiches are waiting. Thanks to everyone online. It was really, really interesting couple of days. Hopefully everyone took away something from it. And I look forward to perhaps another one next year if we're another one. I'm nervously standing here waiting for it.
No, indeed.
But yeah, thanks very much. So with that, we'll close, and please join us for lunch afterwards. Thank you.